up, all you beautiful people? We got another episode of Strange Road for you. I'm Mikey. This is Bub.
What's up?
Bub, how you doing tonight?
It's Friday. Friday.
It is Friday. It doesn't seem like Friday for some reason, but
yeah,
we're
it's
hanging
Friday.
out. Hey, we're partying. We got Stoner in master control. And thank you to all of you guys that have been hanging with us.
Yep.
It's been awesome. We've been rocking and rolling down here, getting some great episodes put together for you guys. And we're super stoked to have our guest tonight, which we met through a friend of the show, Ksenia Moore.
Correct.
Who did a live on the air astrology reading for us. We gave her our information, the time of birth.
You know what?
And
that was
these
all
things.
Before all that astronomical stuff kicked off.
That's why I was like, whoa, let's calm down, because we've already done probably a 40-minute podcast already with our guest.
Wow.
So I wanted to save that because it all ties in. So our guest tonight is author, researcher, founder of The Undying Stars, David Mathisen. David, what's going on, man? Welcome to the Strange Road.
What's up?
Thanks, Mikey and Bub. What's happening? It's great to be here with you and all your Strange Road fellow travelers.
We usually call them hitchhikers, but I don't know that we've ever patented that. I'm trying. Keep picking them up along the way. Yeah.
I like
travelers
that.
Is a question from the 50s, from the Cold War. A fellow traveler was actually somebody who was like a socialist or a communist in secret. So it's kind of a loaded term if you say someone's a fellow traveler back in the Cold War.
Well, that's good to know, because I kind of liked it. I was going to start posting that. That would have been bad news.
Yeah, that's too funny.
Oh, man.
We'll definitely start getting hit with these guys are conspiracies.
But
anyway, thanks for having me on. It's great to be here. I wish, I was saying it'd be great if we were all in that awesome studio of yours so I could see which things that I say make the table turn green.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to talking.
Excellent.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, you jumped on before we had our episode with Ksenia. You popped in and said hi to us, and Ksenia said, you got to have David on. He's incredible. And you popped in, and we started talking for, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, I think. And we just hit it off real quick, and then you're like, all right, hey, I'll let you guys do your episode. So
it happens.
You're in Australia. You're coming to us from Australia. And that's fantastic.
Home of the best music in the world at the current moment, by the way, too. Some of the best bands. Yeah, best psych rock for sure comes out of Australia.
Yeah, no doubt.
Without a doubt. Yeah, some of the biggest ones.
Absolutely.
Cool. You guys are more educated on it than I am, obviously, but
yeah, you've got some great bands down there.
It's got a lot going for it. Australia is an amazing, amazing land. It is really far from people's minds in America. It's like we don't really know Australia other than through movies until you come here, and then you're just an amazing, amazing place. But I grew up obviously in the United States, as people always, when I'm talking here, they say, where's your accent from? I'm like, I don't have an accent. What are you talking about? You have a really thick accent, man. I'm like, I don't have a thick accent. What are you talking about? But it's I've been here for coming up on 2 years. Nice. But I grew up in California, and I have been out to Serpent Mound. And we were talking just a little bit before we turned on the show, and when I was there in 2017 was for the Serpent Mound summer solstice. That's where I got to meet Jeff Wilson, and what an impressive man, impressive mind. He was showing things about crop circles that I'd never considered before. Cut, it's like a laser cut halfway through this, every single stalk, but not all the way through from the same direction. Mind blown, but it was a magical experience at Serpent Mound. That was the year that Graham Hancock and Santha were there, and I got to give a couple presentations there. That was my first time to that part of Ohio. I'd driven through Ohio. I was in the U.S. Army when I was much younger than I am today, and was stationed all over the U.S. and drove across the country a couple of times and pretty much been all over and been to a lot of places in the U.S. But the reason I bring it up is I've watched some of your episodes with Jeff Wilson talking about, look at how fascinated or how important the ancients or ancient cultures around the world viewed the stars, the heavenly cycles, the alignments, all those alignments in the Serpent Mound that, like Jeff was explaining, people didn't even realize these alignments until starting in the 1980s. Is when modern people started to realize those alignments. But around the world, we have monuments on every continent and even on Pacific Islands that are astronomically aligned. And it's not just to the sun, but it's to the moon cycles. And there are, Maya structures that are aligned to Venus cycles and the Coricancha and alignments with Venus. What is going on? They attributed immense importance to these heavenly cycles. And what you usually hear said is, oh, well, of course, everybody had to plant their crops. Well, you don't really need to know where Venus is to plant your crops unless the planets have more power than your modern academia admits. Modern academia would not admit that Venus has any impact on my crops.
Mm-hmm.
Those heavenly bodies have impacts on us. They have, and the moon obviously has an impact on anyone who observes the tides or goes surfing, observes that the moon pulls things around. Those heavenly bodies are impacting us, and where they are in the heavens and the background of the stars may be impacting us. And so my work is all about observing the myths and the evidence that the myths are all based on the stars. And I can explain a little bit more of what that means. But around the world, every single culture inherited these beautiful myths, these sacred stories, these traditions. Sometimes they were oral and passed down orally. Sometimes they were written out as scriptures, the Vedas of India, the scriptures that we call the Bible. All of those stories are based on the stars. There is something really important about those stars and heavenly cycles, and it's mostly overlooked, or it has been largely overlooked, but the ancients attributed in tremendous importance to it.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
No
I mean,
doubt.
that was the TV sky. That was the television. Do you know what I mean? That's what everybody was watching. That was, main event every day, every night. It was beautiful because it wasn't polluted by light as much.
It is so spectacular.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is the biggest of big screens that's available to us every single night, especially if you get out away from the light pollution, like you said. And it has important things to teach us, even in this modern world. I would argue that these myths, they're this precious inheritance that are telling us things that we need for our lives right this minute, this present moment. It is not, quote, just an amazing TV in the sky. It's also got profound things to teach us about ourselves and what's going on. All the problems that we face in the world, they are, the one thing I was shocked at when I went to Ohio was the hollowing out that's happened of, American industry. Detroit used to be the most industrial city in the world. It was like the beating heart of American industry. And a lot of Ohio industry obviously fed into Detroit, whether it was making parts that would eventually go into a car, or I was sitting in a diner right outside Serpent Mound having fried eggs and toast, which was like $5.
Yeah.
I was
Dude, we go shoot there with crews, and we feed our whole crew for like $32.
Oh, it's great. It's great.
It was a classic little diner, little booth, just like you would see in the movie, Baby Driver or something.
Yeah.
But there was like a family at the booth just across from me, and it was a small little diner, and they were talking. I was just eating all by myself. I couldn't help but overhear this one young guy who's probably in his late 20s, early 30s. And he was saying, well, yeah, I used to work for that factory and then it closed down. Then I moved over to such and such factory, but then it closed down. And now I'm working on my, third factory, and it's probably going to close down soon. And it's just that story has stuck with me. This was 2017, almost 10 years ago. That hollowing out of, industry,
Yeah.
hollowing out, creating tremendous economic pain, social pain, just tremendous disruption in life. All of that is actually connected to what the ancients were talking about. They were warning about these sorts of forces and spirits that are the spirit of devouring your own, devouring other people for your own wealth.
Yeah.
That is definitely going on, and they warned about it. In the Odyssey, the Cyclops devours some of Odysseus's men every morning and every evening. Devouring other people is not good. The myths say this is not good. Avoid this. Here's how to avoid it. They tell us. So it's on an individual level. It's got things for us, and it's got messages for us on a societal level. It's all so relevant. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but
no, that's really good points, because it just so happens that those were some of the hardest hit in the country with the opium epidemic, the Oxycontin epidemic. That was part of the Oxycontin Express, right to Southern Ohio, baby. And those folks got hit real hard. And when those pills got too expensive, all the heroin moved in, and that area still is recovering from the epidemic, because drugs follow where the poverty is. People are depressed. It's just natural. Most drug epidemics that happen are always in impoverished areas. And the Southern Ohio, the Appalachia, it's tough down there, man. There's no opportunity.
Right. And it not only do they follow that economic, disruption and poverty, they follow trauma, which is, the myths are full of trauma. The myths are depicting trauma. The myths are depicting the impacts of trauma, what they do to us on the inside of our landscape. They depict it as a external, but it's also depicting what's going on inside of us. All those monsters and demons in the myths are actually living inside of us. But Dr. Gabor Mate and a lot of cutting edge psychologists today talk about addictions and these forms of self-destructive behavior are manifestations of trauma. They're actually us attempting to calm or self-medicate a trauma that hasn't been healed. And the myths talk about that. The myths depict that. Like the first story in the Bible of Adam and Eve is all about trauma and separation from yourself. At first, they're naked and unashamed, and then they're no longer comfortable in their own skin, and they have to, put on clothes. And then they're, throwing each other under the bus, and they're separated from nature, and they're separated from each other, and they're separated from the divine realm. That is a depiction of trauma. We're separated from nature. We're separated from our own family. And we're even separated from ourselves. We're separated from connection. And that's what, the opioid epidemic, wow, you could do a whole show on that, and probably many people are much more expert on it than I am. But that shows the devouring of America by Wall Street private equity, basically the spirit of devouring people for profit. It is just a hideous story.
Yeah, they actually got hit with, they're going to have to pay back the Sackler family. I think it's something like $7.6 billion just recently too.
Yeah.
And regarding to that, the fallout from that, which again, they probably made 10 more billion than that, or 20 more billion. So, hey, okay, here's your, you know what I mean? It's like, even if they're making it right, it still didn't make it right in any way. And it still doesn't make it right even after the fact. It never will truly hurt them. It hurts them sort of, maybe their other billionaire friends are like, oh, you just, you're not as wealthy as you used to be. But to them, I mean, they can still get away with it to a certain degree. And that's where it's like, what you're saying is on a broad concept level too, of like consuming your fellow man, or, wealth hoarding or what have you. We were talking about some of this earlier too, and it's just like, is that human nature? Is that how we've gotten to be? Do you know what I mean? Was that the way we started initially, or is it the way that we've gotten where it's like kind of the more you have, the more you can control your own destiny, right? The more resources you have, the longer your lineage can go on, or your country or your community, or so it gets really weird. It's like, is all the world still a very competitive game? I think it really is. You know, we still all are getting closer as countries, I think, with the connected, nature of social media and news media now, and everybody in any country that has the internet. And again, if you get it, that really bridges the gap so fast, but it's still, again, this country against that country, resource against resource. How do we balance that? How do we get to the point where we realize, like, hey, look, we're all stuck here together. There's a limited amount of resources. Do we want to fight each other over this anymore? Or can we just get to a point where we just stop fighting? Do you know what I mean?
This is a great topic of discussion. Mikey, were you about to jump in with?
No, not at all. I mean, there's a lot there, but my whole thing is we've been warring with each other for what seems like an eternity.
But it's never done us any good, really.
Yeah, but when has there not been some
Well,
kind
I
of
won't
war,
say it's never done us any really good. Hold on. What I'm saying is, we could get to a point where if it's like, hey, look, we got to figure out, again, if we don't figure out how to live on this planet and do resources here, we're going to be screwed as a species. But as well, we got to get off the planet before the sun burns up in a couple. But I'm thinking real long term. Like, I'm thinking eternally having people in the cosmos, and that means we'll have to get off this planet at some point. So we're going to have to evolve past
consciously
all of my stuff, all of your stuff. It's got to. Again, like we've said in a couple of the past episodes, like about if there's aliens out there, I don't think they have wallets with credit cards and they're like, hey, did you fill the spaceship up, Bob, before we left? Did you remember to put gas in it? Like, I don't think that's happening. So it's a different thought process. And maybe that's just our own sci-fi that we're like, there's aliens or whatever, because, kind of we create our own reality through science fiction sometimes, right? Like we dream it up and then next thing you know, it's here.
This is a great topic of conversation. And it's like, this is what we should be talking about. Look, like I was saying just before we turned on the record button, we're grown-ups, we're like grown men here.
Right.
This is like we used to joke, like me and a buddy were going down surfing. It's like 5:30 a.m. We're driving out to the surf break and it's still dark. And there's a little cafe with the lights on and you can see in there, the three old graybeards sitting around, and we would say, "Oh, there's the table of wisdom." The dudes sitting around the diner. Let's say, that diner I mentioned in Chillicothe, or how do you say it? Chillicothe or
Chillicothe? Yeah, close.
Chillicothe. Yeah, we're sitting in the diner, and all our listeners are sitting with us, and we're talking about, man, there's some screwed up things going on in our country and in the world. And what do you think it is? We've always been battling over resources. Well, there's limited resources. What I would say is this is exactly what we should be talking about. This is a very important this is like the subject that's tearing the world apart right now. I would say, first of all, we don't have limited resources. We actually have, that's a lie of the Chicago Economic School. Chicago School is where that's where all the evil came into the world, according to the myths. No, I'm kidding. But the Chicago School is the Chicago economics has poisoned everything. They teach. Okay. Let me back up. I said I think resources are actually unlimited. Where do resources come from, according to the myths? Let's see. The grain of the fields. Who does that come from? The goddess Ceres or Demeter. That's why we call cereal Ceres. It gives us cereal grains because that goddess was in charge of the fertile soil. Where does wine come from? As I have a sip of beer, Dionysus, the god of the vine. The vine. So each resource comes from the gods. It's a gift of the gods. We're talking over the electromagnetic spectrum. Who's the god of? I'm talking Greek myths here, but Every culture has gods and goddesses, and they're the same principles. They just have different names, some different costumes, or a few slight characteristic changes. But let's just go with Greek myths. The electromagnetic spectrum would belong to Zeus and his thunderbolt. Everything in America, United States, is blessed with enormous resources, natural gas, oil. Well, that comes from under the earth. Who's the god who gives that? That's the god of the underworld. Hades was the god who gave everything under the soil, gold, oil. That would come from Pluto, or the wealthy one. That's his name, Pluto. They said Pluto because they didn't want to say the name Hades. It was dangerous to say his name. So they would say, well, let's just call him the wealthy one. That's a little safer. So plutocracy means rule by the ultra wealthy, but plutocrats. But
interesting.
The gift from under the earth, those come from a different god. So what I'm getting at is the resources come from the gods.
Yeah.
And what is the most amazing resource of any nation, America or any other nation? America has a population of 330 million. I think Australia is something like 25 million or maybe 30 million tops, much fewer people. But but Australia has tons of natural resources, but what's the biggest resource in any nation, do you think?
It's people.
Ding and bing, like what was that annoying guy in the movie Groundhog Day would say,
"Oh yeah,
that's one of our favorites."
Yeah. Exactly right, and that's unlimited, right? But the myths also show that the gifts given to men and women come from the gods. Oh, she got a lot of beauty. Oh, she got skill at weaving. Even the birth of a baby, where does it come from? The divine realm, whether you want to say the gods or not. Nobody can produce a baby except through, you can't make a baby without help from the divine realm. Where does that spirit, that soul come from? So the babies born into a nation are gifts from the gods that are given gifts like beauty or craftiness. Daedalus was able to invent these wings so he could fly. All those gifts are given from the gods, and ultimately they're for the benefit of the nation. But what oligarchs or plutocrats want to do is take those resources for themselves. That is, and the ancient myths actually warn against that. But so those resources should be used to build up the nation, but they could also be just fenced off and used for the benefit of just wealthy people who happen to be politically connected to get hold of those resources. And going over to other nations and stealing their resources that's a totally like parasitic way. Instead of using the gifts of the gods, you can just use them to make yourself wealthy. And those are two totally different roads. And I don't have to tell you which road the United States has been going down for about at least 50 years. You could say maybe all of its history has been stealing resources. Really, I think the Civil War was a battle over this because Abraham Lincoln, he was saying, wait a minute, we need to free the slaves. That's a wrong path. To enslave other men and women is a wrong path. I'm against that. Abraham Lincoln was, one of our greatest presidents, I believe. There are people who actually hate Abraham Lincoln and argue with me over this, but Abraham Lincoln said, no, we got to free the slaves. And also, he said, we have to create our own money, greenbacks. He created something called greenbacks instead of borrowing from the private bankers or from, the London bankers or the Wall Street bankers to fund the war. He said, no, we can, as a nation, we can create our own money. The private banking doesn't need to be involved in this. And he was shot in the back of the head. Of course, it was just a lone nut assassin, right? No, it was not a lone nut assassin. Anybody who tries to create the power of private banking, this country, America, has been arguing over that since day one. Alexander Hamilton, Andrew Jackson. You read about the Bank of the U.S. It's a question of whether the money system used to have the pictures of the gods and goddesses on the coins back in the Roman and Greek times, because money is just a way of controlling those resources. So the question is, are those resources going to be for Wall Street's benefit, or is it going to be for the good of the nation? And Abraham Lincoln said, no, Wall Street, I'm going to shut your going to shut you down, and I'm going to create public money, greenbacks. And he was shot. And then you had the age of the robber barons after that, basically private railroads, private, Standard Oil, Rockefellers. That whole battle is between, are the resources given by the gods for the benefit of the nation or for the benefit of a small group of connected private, basically, I use the word Wall Street to just cover that whole privatization.
Yeah.
And the Chicago school teaches, oh, that's the best way. That's the only way to do things. Well, that's why the country is so gutted right now, is because basically private equity and Wall Street want to buy up everything for their own benefit. They'll buy the bridges, they'll buy the roads, then so they can toll them. They'll buy all the, there's a story about Manor Healthcare. A private equity group, Carlyle Group, bought all these nursing homes, immediately sold all the real estate in a lease back. I'm getting a little bit far afield here, but this is an example of what private equity will do, and then basically drove it into bankruptcy after they'd paid themselves with all the sale of the real estate and other really shady practices. It is not for the benefit of those people in the nursing homes. It's basically devouring, and they were actually doing these fraudulent things like billing Medicare, making these old 90-year-olds do physical therapy so that they could get money from the government. Once they took over the healthcare, they were scamming Medicare by making people who didn't even, these poor old men and women who were supposed to be being taken care of are now in the clutches of private equity and being used as a cash cow. It's just disgusting. That is devouring your own people. That is not long-term planning. That's just, let me asset strip. Let me devour it. That is what the ancient myths are warning against. They're absolutely warning against. That's why they put the gods and goddesses on the coinage, because the money supply only is representative of the resources of a nation. It's a way of allocating the resources. And you can do that publicly or you can do it privately. And in the ancient world, they did it. They did it publicly. Basically, the king was supposed to stop oligarchs from devouring the nation. Anyway, I'm getting a little far afield, but
no, this has been a big obsession
everybody
of mine.
Where they live.
Yeah, when I really started getting into conspiracies, as they're, as you would call it, it always led me to how the Federal Reserve and the IRS, and how even before the Federal Reserve in 1913, that Andrew Jackson and all these people were fighting the international bankers for 100 years. They kept trying to get in, and we kept pushing them back. And that is what I found out. The real reason they killed Abraham Lincoln was, of course, it always ties back to the bankers. JFK warned, about ending the Federal Reserve. There's a lot there. And I think that was one of the big reasons. But it's just, people want to think that, it's capitalism, which there's a lot of things wrong with capitalism. But it's like, you really got to understand who these banking cartels are. It's crony capitalism that the bankers have essentially taken over everything.
Well, and where did banking start?
Babylon.
No.
Oh, in America, like modern day?
No. I thought like the first, hey, you don't have money here, but you had money at this bank.
Pretty much Babylon.
I thought that was the Freemasons.
Well,
Knights Templar.
The Knights
Templar.
They became a banking power.
Well, they were the ones that were starting that with basically going
persecuted and ran out of town. Yeah,
I'm just saying it's the Rage Against the Machine narrative. Even though I'm not sure if they're raging against the machine anymore, if they're part of the machine. After a while, lines get blurred. But anyways, who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the money controls the power, basically too. Right? Like if you can inflate or deflate the money at any time, and you have money saved up, David, but guess what? We're going to just make it worthless, right? Like that's even a funny concept. Like, you make $1, you put it in the bank. Well, if you're not making any money on that dollar, it's like fruit rotting on the vine by the next year, right? Like it's lost whatever percentage to inflation every year, every couple of months. Isn't that funny? Like you can't even go, well, it's going to keep its value because
not.
it doesn't have any value. It's just
Fiat.
what we say it is.
Yeah, it's fiat.
Yeah.
Totally.
When it used to be backed by actual, gold or some kind of like physical security.
Yeah, this is I'm going to disagree with you actually that I don't think we should go back to a gold standard.
Yeah, I don't either.
But this is a very, it's basically the central topic. This is the central topic that all the other topics, all the other kind of distractions are, I believe, in one sense, trying to keep us from this one topic of what is money.
Yes.
How does money get created? What does money mean?
Oh, sure.
Because that in many ways is the central key. And when you guys were just a second ago arguing about, well, where was it? Babylon? Was it the Masons? Was it Venice? So Venice, the Venetian banking system, people trace it to Venice. If you guys watch some of the stuff of Matt Ehret, he's a Canadian. And look, I don't agree with every single thing that he says or all of his worldviews, but he has some very interesting historical perspectives that are valuable, that are also, they're actually related to Lyndon LaRouche, who was a big kind of conspiracy guy in the 60s in America, the LaRouches. And they argued, oh, well, Great Britain is the real problem, or the British Empire and British banking. And, well, where did British banking come from? Well, there was British banking and then there was Dutch banking, but it was all Venice banking and Venetian banking. Well, the name of Venice, some people have said, well, Venetians is simply Phoenicians. All you got to do is voice the PH from Phoenicians. If you just make the same exact sound with your lips, Phoenicians, but put a voice behind it, it becomes Venetians. The Phoenicians, that was, Tyre and Sidon and the Carthaginians in ancient times. They were basically, their gods and goddesses were basically Babylonian. They were a Semitic people. So were the Babylonians and the Akkadians, not the Sumerians. But a lot of kind of modern conspiracy or just kind of conventional conspiracy, conventional wisdom is, oh yeah, Babylon created money and money is debt. And that's why we're all enslaved. When we're born, we're given a birth certificate that carries a bunch of interest on it and blah, blah, blah. I think that's all bullshit. I think that's all wrong. The ancient Babylonians actually canceled the debts frequently. We can find, they canceled the debts. So a lot of my economic things that I'm saying relate to the work of Professor Michael Hudson, who is actually related to a university in Ohio. I think he's a professor emeritus at UMKC, University. Oh, so that's Missouri, Kansas City, not Ohio. But Michael Hudson he's done a lot of work on ancient economics and talks about debt and how important debt is, and debt cancellation is central to all the ancient myths. The Bible has all kinds of things about debt cancellation. Well, in the Jubilee year, all debts will be canceled. The land will go back. If you lost land because it got foreclosed on, after 7 sevens is 49. The 50th year is a reset. That's a Jubilee. And when Jesus, I believe Jesus is this is all esoteric. I don't believe there's a literal Jesus, and we can get into some of my work in a second. But
I told you,
as we can see, it's all related. When Jesus, the first sermon that he gives, when he sits down, he unrolls the scroll of Isaiah and says, I'm come to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. Michael Hudson says, what is he talking about? He's talking about the cancellation of the debts. The prisoners shall be freed. The very first text that Jesus, if you take the story literally, it's not literal, but it's saying, I'm here to cancel the debts. I'm here to the stuff that's been foreclosed shall go back to the people that it was taken from. In the ancient times, including Babylon, there are, pillars that say, and Hammurabi has canceled the debts, or, Hammurabi's stela, he'll erect a pillar that says, in this year, all debts were canceled and blah, 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 blah. Why? Because the debts were actually generally public. Credit was created by, just like Abraham Lincoln was creating the money instead of Wall Street. If you say to Wall Street, my car loan, or you say to a bank, could you just cancel that and I'll have my car free and clear? And they go, no, you still owe 30,000. And I go, yeah, I know, but I want you to forgive that debt and just let me have my car. You know what they'll say? We'll be there tomorrow morning before you wake up to take your car.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to cancel that debt. Now, that's a form of consumer debt. I won't get into distinctions, but in the ancient times, debt was generally created by the palace or by it was the central, for the purpose of, okay, let's build a road here. We can create the money. The money that gets created, that's a debt. But who's it a debt? Our money, the money that's sitting in your pocket right now is a debt.
Mm-hmm.
That it says a Federal Reserve note.
Yep.
It's a Federal Reserve note. It's a debt. Who owes it? It's a debt that is owed by the Federal Reserve or by the government. It's a government debt. It's not a debt on me, Dave, or you, Mike, or you, Bub.
Right.
That's not a debt you owe. That's an asset to you and a liability to the government. What do they owe you in exchange for that? Well, technically, all they owe you is a forgiveness of taxes. So your money can be used to pay off your tax. They put a liability on you that they call a tax. They say, well, Mike, well, Bub, you owe me $10,000 this year. And you go, dang, I just got a liability. I owe $10,000. And you say, what? I happen to have 10,000, Federal Reserve notes. Will you take this? And they say, yes, well, I'll extinguish your debt in exchange for so your $10,000 is an asset. Your tax liability is a liability. Anyway, all your notes is a debt of the government. And if the government can create money, then the government can cancel that debt with no skin off their nose, as they say, it's no burden to them. It's no burden to Hammurabi to say, I have loaned all this money out to the various projects to help, we needed canals to irrigate the fields because we had a drought. And so I created some money to pay the workers so they could buy beer after they, dug the canal, and we irrigated the fields. That produced more grain. Everybody was happy. And I will cancel. So the government creates the money. Now, let's say some farmer owes some tax to the government because he was growing grain and the government decided to lay a tax on it. And we could talk about tax theory. Of course, governments can, do taxes different ways. There's all different ways, and we could argue all night about it. But let's say that farmer had a tax due to him because he was growing corn or whatever he was growing. But there was a plague, or there was locusts, or there was a battle. The Assyrians came in and burned down his crops, and the tax collector comes around and says, hey, Dave, where's your tax for this field here that we irrigated with those canals that all these dudes dug in the sweat of the hot Babylonian day or whatever? And I say, I'd love to pay you this tax, but I can't. The Assyrians came in and burned down my field and burned down my house. I can't pay you. And they say, yeah, but you owe me a tax. And I say, I can't pay it. Guess what Hammurabi can say? Dave, I forgive you the tax. And they did that frequently.
They put people in jail.
Right. Or we're going to take your land. What the Babylonians actually did, we have their records, was cancel the debts frequently whenever there was a COVID. Or, sorry, not a COVID, but a plague. Like, I can't pay my taxes. All right, well, we'll forgive that. So if the debts are owed to the people, the entity that makes the money itself, which is the government, then the government can easily forgive those debts. But if the money is owed to Wall Street or to a bank, they go, I can't afford to not collect your car payment, Dave. I can't just forgive your car payment because then I'll go out of business. And so by having the money supply, what Lincoln was trying to do was say, greenbacks can be made by me without Wall Street intervening, or by the government with its proper constitutional authority says Congress shall have the right to coin money. And some people say, well, a greenback isn't a coin. All right, fine. Don't split hairs. He could have made the greenbacks coin if he wanted to. But the point is, there's a constitutionally proper role for the government to create the money. Not the Federal Reserve, not Bank of America, the government. And Lincoln understood that it didn't need to involve. And then when there's a national emergency, whether it's the Vietnam War or whatever you decide is an emergency, COVID, people aren't able to work, so they can't pay their taxes. The government can just say, no problem. I forgive those taxes. I cancel those debts. And if I need money again, I'll just make more because I'm the government. That's called modern monetary theory, which you've probably heard all about because Wall Street hates modern monetary theory. They hate it. They make fun of it. They call it, oh, magic money tree. Oh, yeah, modern MMT. It's all BS. It's BS because it shows that actually Wall Street is not necessary to fund any infrastructure.
Sure.
Wall Street isn't even necessary to fund people's retirement accounts.
Boy.
You and everybody else put all our money into Wall Street for our retirement account or the pension fund. CalPERS is one of the biggest piles of money on the planet. California Public Employees Retirement System. It's an enormous billions and billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars.
It's a lot of money.
And it's a lot of money to do what? To make the pensions for public employees, whether they're prison guards or nurses or whatever they are in California, those public employees, their pensions are basically in Wall Street. The CalPERS invests in private equity. Where do private equity raiders like the Carlyle Group that I told you about that went around and bought up all the nursing home companies, right? Where do they get their money? From places like CalPERS, people investing, CalPERS, but you don't even need CalPERS. Your and my pension should not have to actually depend on Wall Street. The government could just say, I know this is getting way off.
I'm with you, man. I'm with you.
The government could just say, when you turn 65, we will magically create $10,000 a month in your account.
We talk about this is the kind of stuff we've been talking about behind the scenes quite a bit. Yeah. This is awesome. Why
do you need to give it to Wall Street first?
Yeah.
So they can charge fees on it for 30 years while you're working. And maybe it goes up and maybe it goes down. If the government actually has the power to create money, which they do, which they always have. They used to mint money in the times of, it's not really modern monetary theory because the Romans made coins. The Phoenicians made coins. The Greeks made coins. They put the faces of the gods on them because those are the money. People say, oh, if you just print money, it'll be inflationary. That's actually Wall Street arguing. They use that as their sword to try and chop down modern monetary theory. But actually, modern monetary theory isn't debatable. That is how money gets made. What you do with that knowledge is debatable, but this is how money gets made. The answer to, well, we can't just print money. Well, yes, we can, and we do. That's actually how money gets made. We do just print money. What we can't just print is what we started the whole conversation with: resources. Right. I can't just print out oil. I can't just print out people with talent. I can't just print out inventors or engineers. That comes from the gods. That's a gift from the gods. That's why the gods' faces is on the money. So a nation is given resources by the gods. The money is just a representation or a way of allocating those resources. If I want to have 300 million people employed working on the roads and the highway system, which is falling apart in America, we've got potholes, we've got, dangerous bridges falling down because they're ill-maintained. If I want 300 million people suddenly to work on that, and I've got a population of 330 million, and I want to have 300 million people in the army, and I want to have 300 million people in hospitals taking care of sick people, well, I can't do it. I don't have the resources. I've only got 330 million people. I can't print that out. Yeah. But I can print out the money to make those resources be as beneficial to the nation as possible. I can say, if I print out money to create more waterworks that will make more fields able to grow more grain, then I can create more beer. Then everyone will have more beer and the price of beer will actually come down. So if I spend the money in a smart way, it won't actually be inflationary. It'll be deflationary. I'm like, I'm growing more grain because we built more aqueducts or whatever. We greened Nevada to where it could grow grain, whereas before it couldn't. And it was a big, giant expense, but the government just created that money. But the government couldn't create the workers and the cat, big, heavy earth equipment. All that had to come there. Why would that come there? It would come there if the government dropped the money there. If the government drops the money there, then the workers will go there. If the government says, hey, we're going to build canals in the into Nevada and make it grow grain so that we have a beer powerhouse coming out of Nevada. I don't know if that's, is that the smartest thing to do? We could debate that, but it could do that. It's just a question of resources. You can't print more money and suddenly create more resources. But if you've got tons of resources, printing more money actually can enable you to use those resources better. But why would Wall Street be against printing money? Because they're dead set against it. They will argue against MMT. And what I'm saying, they'll say, oh my gosh, you can't just give money to people for their pensions. You've got to invest it with me for 30 years first and pay me fees, 1.5% per year for 30 years. Yeah, because otherwise you can't buy Ferraris and send your kids to Yale or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But they're dead set against government spending stuff, because when government spends stuff, then you need to borrow from Wall Street or from banks less. California, where I grew up, and I went off to the Army at 17. I went to West Point, which is paid for by the government, by the way. I didn't pay any tuition. I got paid when I went to West Point. But if I went to the University of California, which was chartered in the 1870s after the Civil War, sometime during the 1870s, they chartered the University of California. At first, there was only one. It was at Berkeley. Now there's UCs, up and down California. But the first one was UC Berkeley. And if you look at that original charter, it says tuition. It's like section 14 or something of the original charter. Tuition shall be free to all citizens of the state of California, as long as they, are qualified to enter, for as long as we can make that happen. That's I paraphrase it just a little bit, but basically the state said it's in our best interest to have agricultural engineers and, mechanical engineers to build up our California economy. We'll pay for the tuition. All right. Well, what's that going to do to the student loan market? If I'm a banker and I want to loan everybody a crushing amount of student debt, I don't want the government to pay for college.
Yeah.
I want them to borrow. The more government spends, the less room there is for banks to put you into debt. And that's their business model. Put you into debt.
Sure.
So they are going to they are going to scream and squeal and say, you can't do that. Oh my gosh, that's socialism. Well, no, it's not. Abraham Lincoln was doing it. Was he a socialist?
Yeah. Definitely.
So anyhow, we've gotten not really off track, because this is all related.
This is great. I've never heard it put quite like that. My whole thing is, how do we get out of this? How do you get out of that system that we're stuck in to really get these private international banking cartels just out of
Bitcoin?
Yeah.
I'm joking, but I'm half serious.
I mean, that's why I think it's
become a big topic lately.
Yeah.
Especially with the movements it's done now, is what coins are worth. And I think ultimately, just because Bitcoin is more removed, there's other, crypto coins out there that they're trying to put as, this is the one we're going to use, or that's the one we're going to use. And it's like, I don't know if anything has the draw, because again, it's more about getting away from the corruption of the indentured nature of money in general, right? Like, I was thinking of while you're saying that, like, even now with all the subscription-based services, I feel like a shark or a big whale in the ocean with those, sucker fish that stick all over them and they sit there and catch a free ride. And, I guess they're cleaning them, but maybe some more the parasitic, like lamprey or something that sucks your blood, or like having 1 million mosquitoes over you. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts. And how many apps are there now that it's like, hey, we'll help you organize all the things you pay for, because
rocket money.
Everything is a subscription. Everything is a fee. The tax man by the Beatles is real, like you said. Like, you're gonna tax the street. We're gonna tax your heat. We're gonna tax everything. And no, let's get away from that. Like, again, I can't get away from what you said earlier with the Greek mythologies and that consuming of each other. Like, it really is. It's weird, because I'm more of a, like, I want everybody to have a good time. Like, I'm not having a good time if I'm the only one having a good time, right? Like, if I came in here and I had a pizza, I was like, oh, this pizza's delicious. I'm just chowing down on it. I'm like, not giving Mike any. I'm not giving Stoner any of it. I'm just like, it's just all about me. I don't get that. Like, I think of this often too, is I used to have a couple of kids in my neighborhood. They were riding their bikes down the street one day, and, you know, they roll over and they're like 11, 12 years old at the time. Like, hey, you know, mister, can you help us fix our bike? And sure. And so I'm like, you know, helping them pump the tire back up, whatever. And they start talking about somebody's bike, or they wanted a certain bike, you know, and how cool it would be. And I just like gave them a little mental experiment. I said, okay, I want you to imagine you have the utmost coolest bike you've ever seen, like the bike you always wanted. That's the bike you have right now. But now your friends here, they don't have a bike. Do you still want the bike? And the guy was like, nope. I was like, what does that tell you about wanting something versus wanting to be with people, be with your friends, be in that collective? And that you could see it kind of trip a little wire in their head. And they're like, oh, they started thinking. And too funny, dude. I was out front of my house a couple of weeks ago, and this car drives by, and I'm like, Amazon delivery guy? And, you know, drives, and then it turns around and it's coming back. So now I'm like, who is this? You know, my neighborhood can get a little sketchy. And the car pulls up and stops right in front of my house. And this guy gets out and he's like, hey, are you the same guy that's used to live here that repaired kids' bicycles? And I went, I mean, not as like a job, but yeah, like I mean, I fixed a flat tire here and there. And he's like, oh, I'm one of those kids. Like, I'm a grown up now. Like, I'm in college and this and that.
Seriously?
Like, yeah, he doesn't live there anymore. Him and his buddy were driving around after, I think, grabbing cheeseburgers and a beer after class or something.
There forever.
I know, but to me, it was like time traveling, right? Yeah. Because he's a grown adult. You know, he's 6 foot something. He's huge.
Kids'
yeah, and I was like, no. I was like, no. But yeah, I did a couple of times. And he's like, oh, hi, I don't want to say his name because I don't want to out him. But he's like, I'm so-and-so. I was like, oh, you live down the road here with your sister and mom and your dad. And I was like, what's up, dude? Like, it was funny because it's something you don't expect to happen.
Yeah.
No, there's a very story, Bub, and a very important point that you're making is we're wired for community. That is part of who we're supposed to be, helping others, having compassion for others, having, you know, caring for others. That is, and then the question, we touched on it somewhere along this conversation already. Did some kind of like alien mind virus come into, you know, like, who are these people who want to devour others? Because like you asked those two kids, which would you rather have? Two, you know, you and your buddies, and you're all on crappy bikes, or you take away everyone else's bike and you've got the best one and they don't have any. Well, I don't want that.
No.
That's normal. That's normal.
Right.
Like, and I'll show you a slide.
Yeah, please do.
I'll show you a slide real quick. This is from a video that I sent you guys. Mikey watched it. But I say in this video, my most recent video, I'm about to make a new one, which is about this subject of devouring one another. Devouring one another. And actually, I'm going to talk a little bit about the 2013 version of, I'm giving away a little bit of on your show, a little sneak peek. We're hanging out in the Chillicothe
sweet
kind of.
Yes.
I'm going to talk about the 2013 Lone Ranger.
Okay.
What do you mean?
The movie.
Everyone hated that.
Lone Ranger.
Yeah,
I never saw it.
You didn't see Lone Ranger?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I didn't know this. I'll have to go back to it.
Johnny Depp and Armie Hammer and Lone Ranger.
Remember Bowser? He played Tonto, and he sent Bowser, our friend, a picture of him as Tonto and signed it. Johnny Depp.
I don't remember that at all.
He had the picture of Johnny Depp up on his. That's from that movie. This is weird.
No, he met Johnny Depp through the John Dillinger movie.
I know that, but the picture he sent him was
I didn't know
him
this.
as Tonto.
Oh, I didn't know that.
From the Lone Ranger.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Anyway,
no, I've never watched
David.
that film. I know what you're talking about now. Now you say Armie Hammer and you got my head spinning. He's an interesting character.
Yeah, but anyway, in that movie, not to give away spoilers, everyone go watch it first. And it got panned in the box office, but actually, the more I watch it, the more I realize there's profound themes going on in there. It's a little, corny, silly, and there's a little bit of comedy side to it, but they're playing with themes that are very important. And there's this spirit of this Native American legend of Wendigo.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes it's
Oh yeah.
go, which is cannibalistic spirit that the more it eats, the more hungry it gets. It's never satisfied. And in the movie, the Johnny Depp character says, "I'm the last of the Wendigo fighters." It's like a spirit that is, if someone had Wendigo spirit in the tribe, they would be driven out or they would be killed, because it is like an alien thing to act that way. To devour other people for your sustenance is not okay for the tribe, and it was seen as a disease, but what we've got in America is basically a hijacking by that Wendigo spirit is what is devouring all those stories that I was telling you about, the nursing homes, or the strip mining of the society has been going on. And it's like I'm not going to say it's an alien. It must be, it's possible that there is that. We all have that potential to become that way. It actually, in the Wendigo legends, apparently, if you hang out with a Wendigo long enough, you'll become one too. So
Yeah.
I guess everybody has the danger of having that, but naturally, that's not what we're supposed to be. And your story about the kids on the bike shows, that's like, naturally people want to help other people. Naturally, people don't say, old people in nursing homes, that's a way for me. I can abuse them for my own enrichment.
Right.
That's good. So normal people don't think that way.
Right.
And yet Wall Street is built on short-term devouring, or private equity. And I just use Wall Street as a short term, but devouring other people is not natural. It's a twisted, and in that movie, there's these like Presbyterians who occasionally show up and march through singing hymns. And it's like, and they're a negative force. And the movie is saying something about that. Let me talk to this thing I've got up on the screen.
Sure.
If you guys it's my metaphor for history. If you imagine it as a road, imagine we're looking back down this road into the depths of time. And we're up here, today we turn around, we've been coming along down the road, but it's got twists, turns, it's got ups, downs. Some periods are higher, some periods lower in human history. But as we go back in time, we're here in the modern era. Way back down the road at some point was an ancient world where we had the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Carthaginians, the I already said Egyptians, ancient India, ancient around the world, the Maya. They're part of an ancient time that somehow we're separated from them. But they talk about deep, I call it deep ancient. Well, they talk about a golden age, actually, way back, golden age. The reason I showed this is because all the myths of the ancient world, whether it's the earliest myths and artwork of ancient Egypt, the earliest myths from Sumer, which is very ancient culture, earliest texts from the Vedas of India, what we have from the Maya, around the world, they all have inherited myths. And even in their earliest myths, they're already using the same system. This is what my work shows. I have written books about the Egyptian myths, about the myths of India, showing that they're all using this same system. Well, where did they get it? If the earliest Egyptian and earliest Sumerian and earliest India, earliest China are already using a system, it must come from something before, which I call deep ancient. Now, the conventional timeline says, well, those ancient civilizations like Sumer or Egypt, that was the first civilizations, because before that, humans were just hunter-gatherers or primitive, blah, 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 blah. No. There's more and more evidence that there was some advanced cultures,
Mm-hmm.
and all the ancients talked about it. Yeah, we're much less than the people who went before us. All the myths of the ancient world say, yeah, there was a golden age, or yeah, there was a time of the gods, or yeah, men today are way weaker and more pathetic than they were back in the. So the ancients acknowledged a deep ancient, but today modern academia says, Graham Hancock, oh, they call him a pseudoscientist, or, they just make fun of the possibility that there were civilizations that may have had higher technology than Egypt long before Egypt. But it's clear that there was, and the myths show that there was, because if the most ancient myths from Egypt and the most ancient myths from Sumer are already using some well-developed, fully developed, sophisticated star system, which I show, then that's yet another piece of evidence. So there's some kind of catastrophe that separates the ancient world from the deep ancient. And that's what, researchers like Randall Carlson and George Howard and Ben from Uncharted X and the Comet Research Group and Robert Schoch talk about, solar eruptions, comets hitting. There was something, maybe more than one something, that caused a split and a loss of the deep ancient. And the myths are kind of a remnant of that. We have all these myths around the world. They're a remnant of the catastrophe. It's like the jigsaw puzzle got upended by a catastrophe and little pieces are scattered around the world, but they all fit together. But my most recent video that I pulled this slide from, I call it the second catastrophe, because the ancient world got ended by what I call a second catastrophe. All those myths got hijacked by, I call them in this video, scriptural supremacists. This is like an alien mindset that came in and took and hijacked those beautiful ancient texts and turned them into something different and ended the ancient world. And down after the ancient world, basically, we went into the Dark Ages, at least in the end of the Roman Empire and Western Europe went into the Dark Ages. It was basically subsistence, no more civilization of the ancient type anymore. It was, the church and basically oligarchy. If you're not, if you can't own land, you're just a serf. You cough up everything to the lord of the manor, and your life is going to be pretty brutal. And everything that you make with the sweat of your brow is going to somebody else. That's the Dark Ages.
No doubt. Yeah, it does seem like we devolved from some type of golden age or whatever they talk about the different ages in the Hindu myths, and there's a lot of cultures. Yeah, those cycles are interesting. But Mayans talk about it. They all talk about it.
Yeah, that's right. The Maya, the sunstone, which is called the Aztec sunstone. But the other thing that happened when this second catastrophe happened, there was a obscuring of the actual history, because for some reason we have to obscure the existence of a deep ancient and a golden age and say, oh no, that's all just myth and blah blah blah. And when people like Graham Hancock show evidence around the world of, wait a minute, there's something more ancient. Oh no, academia's got to make fun of it, call it pseudoscience, call it BS. Why? Because I introduced this concept of this alien idea of this Wendigo spirit. It has hijacked humanity in a way. The scriptural supremacists then went around stamping out myths around the world. That's, we talk about what happened to the Maya. All their texts got burned deliberately by the Catholic Church.
Yep.
Or people in Europe didn't used to be Christian. They used to be Norse myths or Celtic myths or Germanic myths. They got their culture stamped out. Why? What is going on? We have to actually go back to the ancient wisdom, which gives us the pattern, but we have a new pattern came in and said, oh, that old pattern is bad, and all the history, the deep ancient, that's all lies. I think this is related to the spirit of Wendigo, that's what came in and started, the killing of the Native Americans, which is shown graphically in this movie, Lone Ranger, but obviously is not just a movie. What inspires that kind of how can a whole society go along with that? It's just horrific.
Mm-hmm.
This is an alien. Maybe it's not alien, but if you hang around with a Wendigo, you might become a Wendigo. We've got to be careful of this thing, and that's what's devouring. I believe is devouring America, and leading to these conflicts are not. Oh well, there's just limited resources. It's kind of what we're told, and we've got to expand to get. No, we've got plenty of resources,
right?
But
Mm-hmm.
but now we got to go take Russia's resources. Why? Russia's like, no, you're not coming to taking my resources. I know that spirit of Wendigo. I've seen you guys do it. You guys have been playing this playbook since this second catastrophe, and it has devoured the resources of Africa and devoured the resources of South America.
Mm-hmm.
And now you want to devour the resources of China and Russia. And finally, the rest of the world is like, wait a minute, we're actually strong enough to stop those devouring parasites. Now you're not coming over here with your parasites.
No doubt.
Agreed.
Now that's where the world is right now, because this parasitical system is not a long-term healthy system, and the parasites are like, okay, we got to go get over into China and Russia and devour them. And China and Russia are like, you know what, that might have worked 100 years ago because you guys were stronger than we are, but not anymore. So now the parasites are breaking their teeth on Russia and China, and they can't get in, and so they may turn with even greater ferocity and start devouring within America, or, we got to now go devour Greenland, or, maybe South America. But it's a very fraught time right now. And I think we can understand it with this paradigm. This sheds some light this helps me understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sure. I mean, yeah, I like your analogy of the road. It's kind of funny because I think of it a lot of time. Like we try to think about, say, back to our parents' days or our grandparents' age or our great-grandparents. Screw that. Try to just go back to like the 1800s and people walking around with, a pistol on your hip. And if you get into a duel with somebody at high noon, you just do that and then you go have a whiskey. And you know what I mean? Like
People
it seems
tough.
fictional. Like even talking about Greece and Rome, and it sounds like a movie. It doesn't even sound like it really happened, or, because again, our lifespans are just, they're still lengthy enough. Don't get me wrong. Like get into the hundreds, and septuagenarians, or you can get pretty old, but like we still don't have that long running historical narrative in our heads a lot of times, nor do we think about it, right? Like I hate to say it, but I would say there's the state of history enthusiasts in the world is not going up, maybe. I think people are more and more consumed by their media, their toys, their iPads, their phones, their social media, society, almost like peer pressure through social media, right? Like when we were kids, we had peer pressure. I didn't have social media pressure.
No.
I don't even know what that is. Maybe I'm making something up right now, but I feel like there is. Like it's whether people know it or not, it's a keeping up with the Joneses type thing. It's you see somebody doing this and they're smiling in the photo. Maybe they had a good time. Maybe they just did it to put it up there. But Facebook really was the first one that started that off. And I remember reading, psychological reports of how people, you could see something and then they think, well, this person's life great. No, it's not great. Like that's just how we can distort reality real quickly. And that's where it's almost like a modern day Plato's cave. Looking through those devices, we see what we want to see. And if we stop and actually look around, we might have a different perspective. If we stop and get in that coffee shop or that little diner and sit and talk with somebody, maybe even if we don't agree with them, I find I learn even more from people I disagree with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I love being in conversations where we can get on with it and have a good conversation, but I do find it interesting to talk to somebody that I don't necessarily have the same feeling or points with, to be like, maybe I'm wrong, maybe they're wrong. Sometimes I'll come away with it like, hey, they taught me something. Sometimes I'm like, I hope I taught them something. Sometimes it's a stalemate, but those conversations have to happen. And I think that's where we're losing a lot of that. And Yeah, maybe we need to get like the cafe tour going. We got to start going around and having coffee at places and finding the old ladies and gents to have conversations
Yeah.
with. Because I used to get to speak to a bunch of people of that population when I was a nurse. I got to speak to so many people that did amazing things, and I always asked them what they did for a living, where they lived, what their hobbies were, whatever that would evoke that strongest memory or feeling, while they're in the hospital for a period of time, because just to get their mind off why they were there. And yeah, I talked to people that built flight simulators or worked out at Wright Pat Base and did all kinds of, wouldn't really tell me much. She looked like my grandma, but I was like, so you know a lot. And she's like, pretty much. And I was like, you're not going to tell me anything, are you? She's like, nope.
You know about the aliens, huh?
What I told her was, I told her I just read about I don't even know what it's called anymore. It's a governmental arm of the agency with the satellites in space that we have, right? The Office of National Reconnaissance or whatever it is, but they can basically read like a dime on the sidewalk from like 4 miles up in space. Like these cameras are so high powered on these satellites. And I said to this lady, I was like, well, what do we have those for? I was like, what is this? Like an alien like TV show? We're being filmed and beamed over to Mars and and she's like, well, maybe. And I was like, what do you mean? And she goes, oh, I worked at Wright Pat I was an aerospace engineer. And she told me they actually use those to recover like the space shuttle that blew up over Texas that time recently, I guess. I don't know if it was a decade ago. I say recent, but it's been a number of years. And she said they would have operators up and, using those cameras and be like, oh, there's a piece there and there. Like they're zooming in from outer space to find it. That's how good it was to do reconnaissance. So I'm like, what's going on here? How much technology do we have? How crazy does this get? And
We got a lot.
to that point,
They just showed it in New Jersey.
those people are the ones that have all the information, though. Like you're saying, like if you've been here long enough to have that old gray beard and scraggly look to you, you probably know something. I don't care who you are. And that's the real thing, is everybody has a good story to them if you actually dig a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is so important. Bub, you brought up a lot of really important things there. Talking with people who disagree with you forces you to re-examine or be able to like, okay, well, am I right here, or do I need to get some more examples to make sure I'm right? Sometimes it forces you to change your position. Like I used to be a biblical literalist. I thought the Bible was literal. I would describe myself back then. I would have described myself as a Christian. I think Christianity is this invasion and hijacking of the ancient scriptures. I don't think the scriptures themselves are bad. That's what draws people to them, actually, is that the scriptures have tremendous, profound lessons for us, but they've been hijacked. And this hijacking involves an obscuring and a putting a cloud, I tried to show it on this picture, over history. Why? Why is that? Well, nobody knows for sure why they're lying about covering up the deep ancient. Why? What's so dangerous for us to know that there was advanced human civilizations before Sumer? Which there obviously was. Look at Göbekli Tepe and other sites that they're finding.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's something back there, but still, there's this smoke generator trying to generate these smoke screens. And I would suggest that part of the problem is or part of the reasoning behind the generation of the smoke screen is if you're a parasite, you don't want the host to know often that you're devouring it. Right. A leech, when it latches onto somebody, has a little bit of numbing agent in its saliva before it starts sucking your blood.
Yep.
And you said, with all these subscriptions that I have, I feel like one of those whales being sucked dry by a remoras or whatever, sea leeches sucking my blood. And it's funny because I just pulled this up. I didn't want to have to pull this out, but here's Michael Hudson's Killing the Host. I had it just propping up the power cord for my laptop here, but I just pulled it out to show you. This is Killing the Host by Michael Hudson. He uses basically parasites will devour your nation, or they will devour. This is a drawing from like the Dutch period, but it's showing, parasites
That's
within
cool.
parasites within parasites. And the reason we feel that way is because parasites have latched on to our civilization. And I'm not saying they're not human. I'm saying if governments allow exploitation, some people will exploit others.
100%.
So there's
Yep.
there's a proper role to stopping the parasitism. We know what it is and we can stop it. Private banking is not required for a modern economy. Look, you could still have private banks alongside public banking. Every post office could be a bank. I'm getting back into details that I don't need to get into, but you could still have a public banking function and still allow private banks to exist. They just have to, find customers that want private banks as opposed to the public option. But you don't have to fund your bridges with a Wall Street bond, is what I'm saying. We know this. This isn't mystery. Okay, going back to the, getting out of the weeds. If a parasite is bleeding its host dry, it doesn't want the host to wake up. So spreading lies and false history. If you've hijacked a civilization, you don't want it to know it's been hijacked.
Right.
Yep.
So I'm suggesting that that cloud of lies and false history could be the numbing agent of the parasite. And they want us to be confused, and they'll spin out, hey, let's talk about Tartaria. Well, bullshit.
You just struck a nerve with me. Sorry. You said Tartaria. But let me ask you a quick question. If all of these private banking cartels, is what I like to call them, if they all go away and we start doing this, do private companies still exist? Because we're used to, I start a business, I need capital, I go to a bank, they give me money, which is debt that, from the Federal Reserve, they print the money to give to me to start my company. So if the government is basically saying, hey, we need roads, we need a video done, we're going to pay this strange road to come and do this event or this video. So do you still have private companies, or does everybody just work for what the overall need of the community or civilization or country or kingdom or whatever we become? Because countries probably won't exist at this point if this modern money situation would actually take place. So who do you work for? Or is there private organizations still?
Yeah, no, great question, Mikey. The book is thick because it's not just a simple concept, but what he's talking about is actually something that classical economists have been arguing over for hundreds of years. They call it economic rent. Economic rent is basically making a free lunch off of the natural resources of a nation, or there are things that should be public and things that should be private. Well, which ones?
Okay.
Well, we could argue about that all day long. The whole 20th century was about arguing about that. But if I'm a great maker of burritos and I want to start Dave's Burritos, should that be government run? No, I should have to compete with Mikey's Burritos and Bub's Burritos or whatever. But the road that goes from Chillicothe to Ohio, you can't have 100 of them. They can't all compete with each other. That's right. Now we're getting to kind of a natural monopoly, or, the Golden Gate Bridge. We're not going to have 100 different bridges across and everybody's going to have their own private bridge. So certain things belong properly. This is what people have argued over, but let's say the water supply in Flint, Michigan, should that be privatized or should that be public? I would say, it should be public.
Yeah.
That is what the government should provide, clean water to its citizens. And if government's not providing clean water to its citizens, then that government needs to be fixed, changed, whatever.
Yep.
That's a proper role of government. But if I privatize the water system, now I'm a private company providing water. I have to be profitable, right? There's no private company that can be losing money every single week and stay in business for 10 years. It'll run out of money, right? So if I'm running the water system of Flint, Michigan, I've got to make a profit. And so profit is it's necessary for me, because I, Dave, can't print dollars, but Abraham Lincoln can print greenbacks. The proper government can print dollars. So the proper government can run the water supply, guess what? Not at a profit. They can run it at a loss, which is exactly how we run the interstates in general.
Mm-hmm.
The interstate system, do you want to have to pay a toll every 5 feet that you're driving down I-90?
I was going to say,
that wouldn't be good.
Toll roads are a joke.
No, I
And
just
they're-
want my
they're
taxes going to
terrible.
roads instead of for
Tolls
paying
are-
for
the
sexual
roads-
misconduct scandals in Congress. There's a whole budget for that,
Yeah.
like millions of dollars in budget
Oh, yeah.
for just to pay for all the legal fees for sexual misconduct in government. Like, can I get that to like pay for my road?
Yeah.
So to answer your question, Mikey, yes, there's still private businesses, but there are things that are proper for a nation to provide as infrastructure. And I
Right.
would say those things
Yeah.
like power, the power supply, the water supply. Can they use private? Can they fund, the private power company and say, look, you're in charge of the electricity, but we're going to make sure that you keep the prices as low. You could even keep the prices lower than to make a profit, and we'll backfill you with money to make sure that you stay in business.
Yeah.
Yes, they could do that. But it doesn't mean that the government actually has to be
Yeah.
running. But they have a responsibility to provide infrastructure. And infrastructure could also be including universities, like I gave the example of the University of California.
Mhm.
But it definitely includes bridges, roads. It could also include the payments system. So this is where it gets the most important. The money supply is clearly the Constitution says that's clearly in the public sphere. So today we use credit cards. Today we use Visas and debit cards.
Mhm.
When I go buy coffee, I just put out but guess what? 2 or 3% of the transaction goes to whom?
MasterCard, Visa. Yeah.
Bank. The rails.
Don't
They
get
call
me
it the
started on
rails.
this.
Well, every single person who buys a coffee, or if you're selling coffee, then you know this. 2 or 3% of your money is draining away. Why? Because there's a leech there. There's a leech sucking 2 or 3%. Why? Because the government's not doing its job of creating the roads. In this case, the electronic rail system. The government could create that themselves and say, hey, Visa, if you want to make one that charges 2 or 3%, go ahead, but I'm going to make one that charges 0. And the banks would say, oh, I can't do that. That would take, because why? The banks are getting 2 or 3% of every freaking transaction you make, whether it's a gym membership or a college tuition payment. They're
Man.
getting a free 2%.
Nobody
That's
talks
a-
about Visa and MasterCard. You ever notice that? They're never in the news. No one talks
Parasite,
about.
you don't want people to
You
know.
don't.
want-
Yeah. Well,
I'm not going on CNN. The people will get pissed off.
I used to sell credit card processing systems before I got into school. My buddy Sammy was a merchant services guy. So I went and hit up private businesses and little restaurants, and I built a nice portfolio, and I'm receiving a tiny little transaction fee for being, helping them with it's a complicated process because you have the merchant account, you have a merchant services bank. And so the bank, the merchant services salesman is getting a tiny bit, but Visa and MasterCard are getting not only the percentage from your swipe that you're paying, but they also charge the merchant. The merchant that accepts Visa and MasterCard pays unbelievable fees. It's amazing that small businesses can even stay open with the amount of credit card processing fees they have to pay. So there's all these people that are getting a little chunk. People think about credit cards as the front end of the consumer having credit card debt. No, it's beyond that. On the other side, the merchant that accepts the card, they're getting banged too. So it's an actual literal racket that Visa and Master, they're making bank on you, putting you in credit card debt, and they're also making bank on the other side, being able to accept that, and they're making a percentage on the back end as well. It's crazy. And not enough people are talking about Visa and look into the history of, I had to learn about the history of Visa and MasterCard and American Express. And it's a weird, how those companies started, they actually provided a really good service.
That's how most companies
like,
started back in the day. They actually did what they said they would do. They built planes that didn't fall out of the sky, and they made cars that were reliable instead of catching on fire or whatever. That's the whole thing anymore. And that's one of the things that I've talked about, I think, a number of times, or at least maybe I've said to you or whoever, but the erosion. There's a giant erosion in everything, right? Erosion in trust in science and healthcare and government and whatever. Everybody's going, man, do you trust that over there? Do you trust this over there? Do you trust this person?
That's why you have
There's
Tartaria.
a giant erosion of trust. And the reason is, and it goes back to what you're saying though, too. It's about like even like Boeing, right? Back when Boeing was rocking and kicking butt before they paired up with I can't remember the name of the partner that they partnered up with, but when they partnered with them, they basically became beholden to Wall Street and their stockholders. And all they worried about was doing well there, and then their product went to crap. And that's what's happening is everybody's worried about the wrong things, I would say, right? Like I heard somebody say in a podcast I was listening to earlier, he wasn't monetizing what he was doing, right? All the work he was doing and all these things he was doing. He's like, because that taints it for me, right? He's like, if that's why I'm doing it, I'm not doing it for the purpose of like the muse and what this passion is I have towards it. And I used to say it about like, you think of all the famous artists like Picasso and Van Gogh and all these people that were, a lot of them died very poor.
Oh, yeah.
Especially back in the day, like when they were poor artists, like at the Van Gogh Museum, he used to use the same piece of canvas multiple times. And they know that because they would x-ray them and they could see like built up layers. So like in that museum, you could look at one piece of canvas that would have 7 paintings on it because he'd have to go over it again and go over it again. And, you know, again, like you could buy a painting by now, it's millions of dollars, right? But he died penniless or, you know, they're not doing it for the monetary. They're doing it because of that desire to create or whatever that passion is. So I think that's one of the things that's happened on a wide scale is
we're stuck, man.
Oh, I made this as nice and flashy too, and I'm going to put this premium on it. It's like, it's like Tommy Boy. All you did was marked a guaranteed piece of shit. You put a guarantee on the box. Great. Good for you. And that's what I'm saying. The words and the guarantees and the social contracts.
Your boy Bernays.
Have broken down, right? And that's what's really scary is at that point, because we got to build society back up to where we can trust each other. We don't have a lot of that right now.
Social contract is so important, what you just said, because if you've got a government that knows something about 9/11 and tells you something completely different,
right,
there's a break social contract. But,
yeah.
And so, but let me put a pin in that and go back to what Mikey was saying about the credit cards and the Visa rail. Mikey's original question was, well, are there going to be any private companies? What about Dave's Burritos? What about Mikey's, car shop? Yes, those aren't infrastructure. Dave's Burritos aren't infrastructure. They're, nice to have or need to have or whatever, but it's proper for me to compete with every other burrito restaurant up and down the street. Mm-hmm. But infrastructure, the gifts of the gods, the oil under the ground, the land itself, all these things, this is something we can and should debate and has been debated for hundreds of years. But where do you draw the line between what is proper for government to do? Certainly, most people would agree, unless they're Wall Street private equity making bank off of privatizing this, that water is a proper role of government to give the citizens of Flint, Michigan clean water.
Yep.
That electricity, to power people's houses. In the modern age, electricity is a necessity. It's not just a luxury. Yes, we could go back and live like the 1800s, but it's hard to do.
We don't have the forest to cut down for the wood. We've turned them into cities. So I would say you're right when you say it is a necessity because
proper. Yeah. That's a proper role of government is to provide infrastructure. And one of the most important pieces of infrastructure is the financial infrastructure that never gets talked about because we just assume, yes, that should be privatized and it should be labeled Wall Street. Wall Street is privatization of the financial infrastructure. The payment rails, the way they are built out, that Mikey is familiar with from being, what do they call it? An acquirer, a merchant acquirer, or, working in that business. There's a whole industry built around
crazy.
Where people people's talents. Mikey's a talented, intelligent dude, and his whole, years of work was going into merchant acquirer for something that could be, I would argue, we could argue that should be considered infrastructure, and the government should just create the rails. It's not rocket science.
Right.
The government hire people and create the rails and say, this will be done for free. And Wall Street and Visa would say, well, how can you do that for free? There's fraud sometimes, and somebody walks out of a Best Buy with a big screen TV and they used Mikey's credit card, but Mikey wasn't the dude walking out with the TV, and someone's got to get that money back. Well, like I said before, MMT shows the government doesn't need to run a profit. The government can create the money. So the government can properly create the Visa rails at a loss to the government. And it doesn't even need to get paid for by taxes. That's what MMT explains, is the government doesn't use your tax dollars to create the roads. The government creates the roads with money that it creates. The taxing that's fiscal policy, and there's a whole, we could spend an hour talking about it, but the government can run things at a loss for the benefit of the whole country without ruining the country. But Wall Street will squeal about that because they want to get the Visa payments. If we publicize the Visa rail, we say, oh, that's part of infrastructure. A lot of people who build their life on getting Visa payments, and it's a multi-hundreds of billion-dollar industry. It's actually how Elon Musk became a billionaire.
Yeah.
How did Elon Musk
PayPal?
become a billionaire? PayPal.
Yeah.
What is PayPal? Payments. It's just payments, but let's do it electronically. In a proper government, you would have Congress debating, wait a minute, there's something called the internet that has come out. Hey, should we create a Visa rail system, a payment system for the internet that will be free so that everybody can transact
Bitcoin.
without every merchant having to do 3%?
Yeah.
Yeah, Bitcoin to me, I mean, we can get into arguments about this, but Bitcoin to me is a private attempt to get around the problem of the government not doing its job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because Bitcoin it's a private entity, and it's saying, oh, we can't trust government. Well, you're right, because government's been hijacked, but properly, government, this is all about hijacking.
Sure.
You've been hijacked by parasites. The right answer is throw the parasites out and have the government do what it's constitutionally supposed to do, which is create money to benefit the nation instead of to benefit a few parasitical oligarchs.
Well, you talked about, not to interrupt real quick, but you talked about Visa and MasterCard built the network. Well, we could build the network. The government could build the network. Visa and MasterCard built their network on the government system. Do you know how the credit card processing takes place? Over phone lines. When you get a terminal, you plug it into a phone line. That's the American government's foundation of how they run it. So they get to run everything for free off of what the U.S. government has built anyways. So,
That's
like, literally, you could just plug in.
Playbook is by Michael Hudson.
It's ridiculous.
The government pays for it, and then oligarchs hijack it.
Yes.
And leech off of it.
Pretty much.
And then they say, "Oh, free enterprise," and I'm a genius entrepreneur. Yeah, you figured out how to basically your own private taxes.
Why do you think there's
people have
Samsung Pay, Apple Pay? Everybody's got to pay now since PayPal. You know, you got Venmo. You have all these companies. Everybody's getting.
They make money off of that. Yeah,
payments. They're getting transaction fees.
That's what I'm saying.
There's 4 or 5 people when you swipe a card. There's at least 6 different companies that are in, and especially if you're doing e-commerce. There's actually a monopoly company. I don't even want to say their name out loud.
I'll say it. What is it?
I'm having trouble thinking of it right now. Authorized.net. There, I said it out loud.
Don't even know what that is.
When you set up an e-commerce portal, because one thing I used to do, I really dug in for a whole month and figured out how to sell credit card processing on the back of an e-commerce portal. Because in the early days of the internet, people were just using PayPal and there was no options, maybe Stripe. And then they basically built these systems and companies, private companies, to then connect into a custom website where you're selling widgets, you're selling t-shirts, whatever it is, and then it goes through a traditional processing bank as if you were to swipe a card at Walmart. So before, there was no system set up online to actually accept a real credit card and go through a traditional credit card processing system. So that's why PayPal and all those guys made so much money. So it's way more expensive to process through PayPal. So Authorize.net was created to literally accept that card from the processing bank and into, it was like a bridge company. But they invented the technology. And they're the only game in town, pretty much in the world. When you build an e-commerce portal, Authorize.net is getting like 3 cents on every transaction probably in the world.
Pretty good working
And
model. I bet they
nobody
don't
talks
work
about
hard.
that company.
Yeah.
And dude, there's
Never
like
even heard of it.
7 or 8 companies. I mean, it's wild. When you swipe a card, how many people are making money from that? It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, I don't carry cash with me often enough. I like spending cash. I just don't ever have it with me because I don't like the fact that there's so much, being snuck out before it gets to where it should. It drives me nuts. Even with anything, even with giving money to charities, I'm like, how much money's getting to the charitable cause? How much is going to the person that's running the charity? How much is going to, you know what I mean? I'm all about my money working as effectively as possible and not being siphoned along the way. So that's really frustrating.
Yeah.
I
got
baked
that
into the
business
system.
Just shocked to learn all that.
Mm-hmm.
I only did it for 2 years, but man, I learned so much about
I bet.
that system. Is just unbelievably gross.
It's one aspect of basically what I would say Wall Street devouring functions or asset stripping the economy. And so when I believe that the real problem that's devouring the West, it's not just the US, Australia's got the same, footholds of Wall Street mentality that nobody talks about. Nobody says, neither the Republicans nor the Democrats turn and say, Wall Street is the real problem here. They will not turn and say that because they're both completely bought and paid for by Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's devouring the country. And it's a form of this Wendigo spirit of devouring other people for profit that the ancient heritage of the world warns us against. It's not just, it's a Native American term, Wendigo, but it's talked about in Greek myths, like I just mentioned briefly with the Cyclops or other and so we have to, these concepts, everybody knows we're in a rear naked choke. We're getting choked out by a rear naked choke, but nobody knows what it is that's choking them. Everybody's saying it's something different. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
it's wokeness. Oh, it's fill in the blank. If you're the parasite, you don't want people to know what it is.
Man. I've been saying that forever.
You're the parasite. You want to give them every possible target and take the attention off of you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of conspiracy culture is part of that smokescreen. Some of it is trying to clear away the smokescreen, but some of it is deliberate. If you're a parasite and you see people starting to get close to the answer, you're gonna deploy some deliberate conspiracy smokescreen throwers and say, "Oh no, the actual problem is black goo." I don't know. I don't know about black goo. That's horrifying, but let's throw some things out there. Oh, flat Earth. Yeah, we'll throw that out there and get people to argue over it. My stuff is about the stars. I remember in 2000, I had already been going, publishing videos, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, oh, you're doing great, but too bad you don't know the Earth is flat. And I'm like, where did that come from?
It came out of nowhere. That's why it's got to be a psyop. Because
I saw a post that said that there's flat earthers and there are believers all around the globe.
That's hilarious.
All I got to say is, if you live in North America, as I did for most of my years, and then you move to Australia, nobody who does that believes in a flat Earth. I mean, you can't explain the celestial mechanics. I've put up celestial mechanics on.
Oh, Southern Cross.
And shown people.
Yeah.
Look, the sun, I got to look to the north and it moves from right to left. Whereas in North America, I got to look to the south and it moves from left to right. Yeah, it moves from left to right because I'm looking south, and east is to the left when I'm looking south.
Yep.
Please explain that to me, or explain to me. Here's a picture I took of the moon and Venus from South America on the same night that my buddy in Tokyo took a picture of the moon and Venus from Tokyo. He's north of the equator. And guess what? They're upside down, not upside. I'm
Mirrored.
upside down. In other words, north is towards the ground when you're here in Australia. So Orion's head always points towards the north, but north is under my feet when I'm in Australia. Trees grow upward, but up in Australia is towards the South Pole, not towards the North Pole. So when I'm looking at Orion, his head is down towards the ground. And I put, hey, here's a picture I took from San Diego of Orion. Here's a picture I took from Australia of Orion. Look. And people have said, hey, flat earther buddy, explain this, sending it to their friends who are flat earthers. I never get any responses because you can't explain it. The flat earth is completely it's a smokescreen thrown up by the parasites. Like, okay, they're getting a little too close. Let's get them to argue about this.
That's a good point.
About that.
And then it's QAnon, and then it's Tartaria in the last 2 years, which came completely out of nowhere. I mean, yeah.
And I call that flat history. Tartaria is just saying, flat earthers say, Dave, how can you prove the earth is round if you don't go up in a spaceship? Well, I'll give you 12 reasons why I can tell you that the earth is a sphere and I don't have to go up in a spaceship. Tartaria is basically running the exact same game plan, but saying, how do you know history is flat if you didn't live 200 years ago? Because my great-grandfather lived 200 years ago and he built that tower or whatever. There's like my wife Ksenia's great-grandfather built this beautiful brick tower in the town of, I think it's Mildura, Australia. I've seen it. I've taken pictures of it. And it's like, well, that would be a Tartarian tower if I'm a Tartarian. It's like, no, part of her family were bricklayers. And it's like saying, oh, we could have never built those structures. Yes, we could have. That's what a society without parasites does. Parasites are saying, oh yeah, the reason everything looks like shit today is because there used to be Oh, it's because of parasites. We used to build beautiful stuff. That's what a parasite-free society does. When the parasites got control, i.e. Federal Reserve, and it's been a struggle. American history has been a struggle between the banking parasite setup. Look, I'm living in Australia, which didn't have an American Revolution. But the American Revolution, I think we finished in 1787, somewhere around there. It was like a 13-year war. It was a big war. It was a long war. It was, a vicious war. The British tried again to get America back. That was called the War of 1812.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were some battles on the Great Lakes and stuff.
They stormed the Capitol. They stormed.
Yeah,
they
burned
actually
down the Capitol.
Yeah, they
Burned
actually
down
stormed the Capitol.
They burned a lot of it. In fact, if you watch the whole inauguration, which I did, I watched the whole inauguration. There's some footage of like Donald Trump walking through, and there's a sign on the wall that says the crypt. And I'm like, the crypt? What the hell is the crypt? And so I did a little research. Well, they were going to bury George Washington in the Capitol building. And so they had this area that was going to be the crypt, but they never ended up burying Washington there because, he died like right before the War of 1812 or whatever. They buried him in Virginia. They were going to bury him in the Capitol, but it got burned down by the British in the War of 1812. So he never ended. That's what the crypt was. Anyway.
Wow.
They tried to get America. They didn't just say, oh, crap. The Americans broke free of the British Empire. Well, so long. Have fun storming the castle. No, they said, we're going to get you guys back. And they tried again with the War of 1812. They lost in the War of 1812. So guess what? They tried again in the Civil War. The South was funded by the British Empire. The Brits were going to put ships and blockade the North, and Russia sent their fleet to both the West Coast and the East Coast. The Russians sent the fleet and said, hey, American experiment, we want you to succeed. We don't want the British Empire to succeed. Russia said to Britain, hey, we're going to put our Russian fleet off of the American coast. So just try and do a blockade.
Damn.
The British Empire wanted to break up the British Empire was on the side of the Confederacy, and John Wilkes Booth may have been. This is what Matthew Ehret talks about in Canada. He's a Canadian. He says John Wilkes Booth, his last stop before assassinating Abraham Lincoln was in Toronto. He was probably getting paid by the British version of the CIA to go kill Lincoln. Anyway, if the British Empire wanted America back, tried in 1812, didn't win, tried in the Civil War, didn't win, how did they get it back? Through banking.
Mm-hmm.
Through Wall.
100%.
City of London, the Bank of London, man. That's the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers connection. That's how they were able to slip in.
That's right. So just, I was going to say earlier, Bub was saying, well, I try and pay him with cash. Yeah, you and I can try and do those kinds of things, those kind of like boycotting actions. Well, I'm just going to pay with cash. I'm not going to use my credit card. It's just not going to work.
I'm with
got to
you.
happen on the big level. You got to have someone who's strong enough to say to the bankers and to say to the American people, hello, I'm the lawfully elected president, and I'm going to tell you what's been eating your lunch for all this time. Wall Street has too much power.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there is an actual legitimate function for banks. Dave is not anti-banks. I don't want to have all my money buried in my backyard. If I have my money buried in my backyard, guess what's going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
Someone's going to torture me until I tell them how to get it.
Right.
So I want it in a bank. And I do want banks to be able to give loans. That is a proper function, but it's got to be regulated. And the Constitution provides for that to be regulated because coining money is a constitutionally appointed thing for governments to do. And that goes all the way back to the ancient times. So there's a proper role for it. I'm not saying don't have banks. I'm saying the government has to regulate that. And you and me deciding we're just going to pay with cash isn't going to destroy the power of banking. It's going to take someone who's capable of turning to the people of whatever country they're the leader of and saying, here's the problem. Banks have got you by the throat. That's why a crappy 2-bedroom 1950s house now costs $1 million.
Right.
In the hometown I grew up in, kids in my high school came from all different parts of the city. Some were, the upper middle class parts of the city. Some were down by the train tracks, down by the liquor store, bars on the windows of the liquor store. There's houses in my hometown that I grew up in that was like, this is basically the lower middle class part of town. This is where the liquor stores used to be. Now, I grew up in what became Silicon Valley. I grew up in San Mateo, California, but those houses are now $2 million, and they're like starter homes for GIs coming back from the war. And, basically like built in 1951, just a little starter home, like a tract home, $2 million.
How?
By the liquor store. That was like the low part of town, $2 million. Why? Well, if I'm a bank, a mortgage on a $2 million house, even though the house is really, it sold for $35,000 or $50,000, or actually, there's beautiful Eichlers in my hometown, Eichler houses that they listed originally for $17,000. Well, today they're $2 million. Well, which is a more lucrative mortgage, $17,000 home or $2 million home?
Yep.
As a banker, I want that home to be $2 million, even if it's only worth $17,000. And as an insurance company, I want you to have to insure it for $2 million, not $17,000, so I can put my kids through Harvard and I can drive a Ferrari.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So to break that power, you and me just using cash when we buy coffee isn't going to stop it.
Yeah.
It's going to take someone on the level of a really beloved national leader to say, hey guys, here's who's got their foot on your throat, or here's who's got you in a rear naked choke, and I'm going to fix it.
Yeah.
But when I fix it, they're going to try and kill me. So therefore, let me just let you know, this is going to be a big struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to say it to the whole country. And when they try and kill me, you'll know that's who's doing it. And by the way, let's say I own one of those houses that is worth $2 million now, quote, worth $2 million. And I bought it for $1 million, and now it's worth $2 million. And some dude gets elected president or some woman gets elected president and says, I'm going to break the power of the banks and that house is going to go back to being $300,000. I'm like, I bought it for $1 million. I don't want it to go down to $300,000. I'm going to take a huge loss. And I was counting on that for my retirement because it was listed on Zillow for $2 million. Yep. I was counting on a $1 million windfall there. So when the government does that, it needs to actually turn to the people and say, and by the way, I'm not actually going to just leave you hanging. I'm going to compensate you we have to fix this national problem. Houses that are really worth $300,000 that are listing for $2 million have to come back to $300,000. I'm going to turn around and give you a check for $1 million or whatever. Because otherwise, but then the banks are going to be the ones who are really going to scream because they're going to say, hold on, my whole book of business is based on a mortgage. You just put me underwater because I loaned $2 million to that dude for a house that you're going to say is worth $300,000. So the government is going to have to it's not just an easy fix. You've got to, unless you just want to throw people into poverty, you've got to somehow make it. Mm-hmm. But you've got to say this is a national emergency. Houses that really could be worth $50,000 are selling for $2 million. We've got to fix that, or you're never going to bring industry back if you've got to pay workers enough money to cover a $2 million mortgage for a 2-bedroom crappy house down by the train tracks.
Mm-hmm. It's a good point.
Yeah, and that's why State Street and BlackRock are buying up all the houses in our city, left and right, and they're renting it back to, people that are 22, right out of college, maybe just getting engaged, and they're trying to buy their first. People can't buy their first home. I mean, it took us forever to buy our first home. And what my house isn't worth as much as they're saying it's worth. I'm just like, how is that possible? Because a decade ago, my house was worth a fifth of what they're saying it's worth now. Because they'll come in and they'll say, okay, you put my neighbors next door, elderly couple, they moved on, new family moves in, and the house just absolutely balloons because you have they'll come in and just, 30,000? How many times have you seen people going $30,000, $40,000 over asking price?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, how many friends did we have in this town
60, 70,
that
80
could not buy a home for years, and they were in their late 30s, approaching 40s.
Yeah.
So they'll just come in and just buy everything. All the apartment complexes are owned by giant.
Rent it all back to you.
And they rent it all because we'll rent it to you and you'll love it. You'll own nothing.
Yeah. Subscription-based living. Everything's on a, re-up on a timetable. You used to be
sucked dry.
Norton antivirus on your computer, and now it's Norton antivirus for you every year. Get another shot or this. I'm not joking, dude. Like, it's a subscription-based living.
I think you're joking.
No, for sure.
But that's everything. Diabetes medication, all of these medications of just heart medication and lower cholesterol.
Some of that stuff's a sham. Yeah, I would say.
Diabetes isn't because type 1 diabetes is one thing.
But like statins, you know.
Statins
might give you I think on average, I won't even quote it because then I'll get hit with some kind of crazy YouTube thing. But anyway.
Oh, this episode's definitely not getting monetized.
Well, that's fine.
You start talking about the bankers and that's like a no, man. We'll probably have to. Yeah, I could care less. I mean,
there's a reason that some of my favorite comedians do movies or movie scenes about bankers. Like Mike Myers in So I Married an Axe Murderer talks about Colonel Sanders. And
what about our favorite movie ever?
And then
Big Trouble?
Big Trouble. Nothing But Trouble.
Nothing But Trouble.
Dan Aykroyd. Yeah, Dan Aykroyd's like, okay, banker. He's like, no, I'm a finance investment, financial investor. He's like, oh, okay, banker. You know what I mean? They try to say it another way, but you're like, you deal with money, you're a banker. You're, again, because it's a whole unseen world. Like you said earlier with CalPERS and here in Ohio, I was in OPERS, so I wasn't even in Social Security, which was great by me because put it in OPERS. I'll take it when I left there and I took my money with me now. And so I can invest it myself for the first time in my life, which is awesome. Right? Get it out of their hands because, again, you're putting your money into a retirement system that doesn't necessarily care about you.
Oh,
it's such a weird thing, where they'll make these leverage bets on, we thought this would be a good move or not. And it's BlackRock and Vanguard and a lot of those, I think they manage a lot of the retirement from the place I did work at as well. And they're gambling with your money. You know what I mean?
I mean, look at Enron. I had a gig in Pennsylvania one time where I worked for this giant oil company, and they built this huge plastic cracker factory. And this poor guy that was driving the crew around in this truck, he could barely walk. He'd been working hardcore construction his whole life, and we worked for this guy for like 3 years. The final day, he starts telling me, it's like, I don't know why this guy's telling me all this stuff, but he's like, yeah, my retirement, my pension, everything was invested in Enron. And when Enron went bust,
He invested it in Enron?
no, his retirement group, whoever was controlling his retirement accounts, were massively invested in Enron, and he lost everything. He said, I should have been retired 15 years ago. I can barely walk. This guy's like old guy, can barely walk. And construction on that level, what those guys are doing, it's hardcore. The second largest crane in the world was there that day to erect the Cracker Tower. It's one of the largest one-piece operation lifts ever done in the world. And
I don't know what we were talking. What's the Cracker Tower?
So a plastic cracker is basically where they take
a plastic cracker?
It's called a cracker. And
Talking like industry terms for high rises, I guess.
Well,
like
no, it's a plastic cracker factory is not a edible cracker. It's a big giant plant that makes tiny little pellets of plastic. And the way they create these, it's called a cracking process. And they have to have all these giant machines that filter through this. I mean, this property was enormous. And it gets funneled to this huge, and they had to pull it up in one piece. So they brought this second largest, they brought this crane from Switzerland or Sweden, wherever it was made. And we filmed a time lapse of this thing going up in the air. And that guy had worked for this giant oil company for his whole life. And he said, I'll have to work until I'm dead. Because they were invested in Enron.
Yeah.
So it's like,
that's devouring your people.
Yeah,
that's
man.
That's called finance being. See, banking is a necessary function in a society, but it is basically should be, and it is actually a deputy of the government. Like, it is given a license to create money. And when a bank makes a home loan, it's creating money. So if the Congress is given the role of creating money by the Constitution, then for the bank to be allowed to make money, Congress has to like give them a badge and say, okay, you're my deputy, now you can create money.
Yeah.
And they're allowing, so the role of banking should be strictly controlled. And it is actually a very controlled industry, but obviously the controls are not the way they should be, because it is running rampant and devouring the nation to where, like you said a little bit earlier, Mikey, nobody 21 years old, the age of marriage in America, average age in 72 was like 18.
Mm-hmm.
Why was it 18? Because you could graduate from high school, get a factory job if you didn't want to go to college, and buy a house.
And make good money.
And have a couple kids and have cars and
have 2 cars.
Man.
Your wife didn't have to
I
work.
still want to get a house with a garage. I still don't have that, little things like that where it's like, I never thought that would be such a want in my life, but it is. It's like,
it's because of the way the economy has been basically pillaged and strip mined. And I mean, we could go really far afield, but 72 is a pivotal year because that's when deindustrialization was actually decided on and started upon. And the 70s, we were still coasting along. The 60s, America was making more and more, industrial things. And today the economy is just basically being strip mined, and Wall Street is still able to make profits off of it, but it is not profiting anybody else in general, unless you're tapped into one of these monopolies or one of these rent-seeking industries that Michael Hudson talks about. Exactly what you're talking about. BlackRock buying up housing is because, well, they're looking for investments that, quote, investments that will pay them gains. And in an economy that's being deindustrialized, what you're looking for are rents. what you're looking for is
what people have
And
to
so they're
buy and
buying
pay
up-
for. Yeah.
they're buying up anything that's just basically a subscription, like you said.
Yeah.
That model, and Michael Hudson talks about this. He's an economist, a professor emeritus of economics, and he's one of the few. He says economics has actually been covered over with a smokescreen because the parasites don't want you to understand economics.
Oh,
100%.
They take
God, no.
part of it.
Yeah. 100%.
I mean, we were never told or explained how the stock market works, or how the Treasury works, or how the Federal Reserve creates money with the Treasury, and then we buy the bonds and the notes, and then, like, does China own our T-bills? And it's like,
yeah.
And I learned about that stuff when I was in my late 20s, where I really,
most people don't know.
with our friend, your boss actually taught me a lot about the economy. When it's just like, my dad probably still really back then didn't understand exactly.
Do you know how many people don't know
at all.
jack squat about it and don't give a rat's behind about it, but they would if they knew how bad it could bite them in the ass.
Yeah.
If they were that guy that is at that company or office that gets screwed out of his retirement or pension because they're investing it willy-nilly. And that's the thing, like, I've watched documentaries on it where, like, one of the ladies who I think she used to work for the SEC, and she's talking to colleagues and lawyers and all these well-to-do people. Oh, what do you do with your? Oh, I don't know. My financial advisor has that or this or that. And it's like, do you know what they're doing with it? Again, it's like the way they paralleled it was like, we have our day-to-day money that we're spending in this and that, right? Like whatever we have in our checking and savings and yada, yada, whatever. But like, I don't think about the money I'm putting away for my retirement like it's my money. Or I used to not, right? Like if it was going to Social Security or it was going to my 401k. And it's like there's a whole different world. And the people that actually know that money world, they're kind of like Keanu Reeves from The Matrix. Like they're like, oh, well, this is going poor. I'm going to move it over here and then I'm going to put it over here. And, they really engineer the rise and fall of companies through the stock market as well, right? So you can make companies go away if you don't like them. You can run all kinds of practices to run them into the ground or to make them inefficient or whatever you want to say. Because one of the ways to make money in the stock market as well is cannibalization, right? So if you buy a position against a company where you're not betting it'll go up, but you bet it goes down, you can bet against companies in the stock market a lot, right? And that's one of the other things that a lot of different people talk about in companies, and some that I follow, but I'm not going to get deep into that. But
here we go, GameStop conversation.
But there's so much going on behind the scenes of like. Again, I'll use this example in the movie Goodfellas, right? If you've seen Goodfellas.
I haven't, but go ahead.
Okay. Anyhow, so the mafia. There's a restaurant owner. He gets behind on his rent. Mm-hmm. He's doing terrible. So he finally goes to the head mob boss. Hey, you got to give me a loan. I need a loan. You got to give me a loan or I'm going to go under. And so, of course, the mob boss finally goes, well, sure, I'll give you the loan. Because now he owns the guy. So now he can go into the restaurant and his whole gang can go into the restaurant and they can eat and drink and this and that. And they can move all the liquor the guy buys. They just sell it out the back door for this,
Mm-hmm.
They're basically just cannibalizing this guy.
They put him out of business.
Yeah, you take as much money as you can from him but there's profit in actually putting the company out of business, which is so counterproductive to being an industrialized nation or having any kind of a strong marketplace or workforce, right? So it's just...
That's how the mafia used to make a lot of their money. Is that business right there.
But that's what's so messed up is like none of that makes sense other than to what his point is of the Wendigo.
Yeah.
It's that kind of like mentality. It really is. It doesn't make sense otherwise.
Yeah. But when they're going out of business, the mob would buy the restaurant and then the mob would just take over and put some...
Well, no, then they take insurance on it and burn it, and they get money on the insurance too.
Well, that's why Brooklyn, and if you look back at like Mike Tyson's neighborhood where he grew up, Brownsville, when he was a kid, and he would describe walking around in full neighborhoods completely burnt to the ground. That's what they were doing.
Interesting.
They were burning. It was all a concentrated effort. People were just ripping money out of those areas. Then the big banks came in, and look at Brooklyn now. It's totally gentrified, dude. It's so nice. You know, well, I don't know about now. They got a pretty bad kind of homeless situation there too.
I don't know. I haven't been to New York in a long time.
But that's where, you know, people just come in and they buy everything up. It's kind of familiar with LA, what's going on there. You know, the transfer of wealth with these wildfires that happened and with Maui in Hawaii. I mean, we could have sent, it would have cost $2 billion for, like what David was saying. Let's just erase the Hawaiians that had the fire on Maui. Let's just forget about what they owe. You're going to get this money. You're going to be able to rebuild your home. We gave Ukraine 4 times that amount of money it would have cost
I don't even know
to
how much we
rebuild
gave.
Maui.
Yeah, there's a big
It would have
disparity
cost
there.
about $3 billion to rebuild and get everybody straight in Maui. We couldn't do it.
Just forgive the loans.
The government is run for the benefit of the people. It's clearly not being run for the benefit of the people. It's being run.
Exactly.
And so it's basically been taken over by a Wendigo spirit. So there's a point in that movie of The Lone Ranger where Armie Hammer is this straight arrow character, and he's like, well, we got to go to the authorities, you know, and Tonto keeps saying, go to the authorities. When are you going to wake up? They're on the side of the, you know, Wendigo. And finally, Armie Hammer realizes, okay, I've got to put on the mask and become an outlaw, because all the authorities that I thought were the authorities have been compromised.
Right. They're on the take.
Mm-hmm.
They're all on the take. So where does that leave us? You know, where does that leave me, you, and our listeners? We have to it's like wake up and see what's actually going on is step one, and realize it. There is a spirit of Wendigo, whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
And there's spirits. That's the other thing. See, I go back to my picture. I don't know if it's still up on the screen of the second catastrophe. The ancient world, there was gods and goddesses given to each society. The Greeks had Zeus and Athena and all the gods and goddesses. The Norse had Odin and Thor and all the gods and goddesses. The Hawaiians had Maui and other gods and goddesses. Maui was a demigod. He was only semi-divine, just like Gilgamesh was semi-divine. These stories, they have tremendous lessons for us. And there is a spirit realm, or there is a realm of the divine. But we have been, that has been hijacked. The ancient myths have been stamped out by this second catastrophe. This spirit of the scriptural supremacists have led to the society of Wendigo that we've got today. The West is a result of this hijacking of the ancient wisdom, which then led to the Dark Ages, which then led to European colonialism going around to places like the Americas and doing absolute genocide, in Africa where there was absolute genocides. And spiritual supremacism is behind the absolute genocide that's going on in the Jewish state today, the self-styled Jewish state. The modern state of Israel calls itself openly the Jewish state. Well, they're committing a genocide. And you've got scriptural supremacists saying it's okay or it's proper. It's completely horrific. On the same par as, you know, the genocide and ethnic cleansing that happened in the Americas. It's because of this hijacking, this spirit of Wendigo. Okay, well, where does that put us? What are you going to do? How are you going to live? Well, on an individual level, like opening up our eyes and seeing what's going on, and then realizing, you know what, there is a spiritual realm and there is gods and goddesses. What can I learn about it? The ancient myths are still there for us to consult, the ones that haven't been stamped out by scriptural supremacists on their march around the world. But the ancient gods and goddesses are actually still there influencing you. You just gotta learn how to listen to them. And the stars and planets that Ksenia was talking about in astrology, where the moon is has an impact. Mm-hmm. And they want to tell you that it doesn't. What Mars is doing, if it's retrograding, has an impact. And they want to tell you, ignore that, that's a bunch of BS. No, it isn't. So on an individual level, we can still take this ancient wisdom and put it to work at the same time that we're hoping that the spirit of Wendigo can finally get corrected before it devours the whole West. It's not going to devour the whole world because it's been trying to jump over to China and Russia, and it's breaking its teeth over there. So it'll just double down and devour the West harder if we don't wake up and say, wait a minute, it doesn't have to be like this.
That's a good point.
Oh, beautiful, David. I couldn't have picked a better way to end the show tonight. Amazing conversation. I wasn't expecting to get into so much of just financial history, and which has been I had to stop looking into that stuff because, boy, when you start getting in the weeds of the IMF and the World Bank and what all these institutions and how they're all connected, it starts to get real dark. And to see what they're funding. And so thank you so much for the breakdown of, and remind me again of the book that you were referring to, because I'm definitely going to throw that in the Discord and put that in the link, because I think I haven't looked at, a different kind of outside view of what is a solution potentially for the system that we're in. But great stuff, man. Appreciate you for taking the time.
Absolutely.
Say hello to Ksenia for us. We're huge fans of hers. We're so glad to see her crushing it. You're crushing it. Absolutely. And don't go anywhere. We're going to give you a proper goodbye. We're going to put this baby to bed. But, man, there you go, guys. David Mathisen, everybody.
Pleasure, David. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mikey and Bub. Those are the two books. I had them out because I'm working on this.
There you go.
Sweet.
Yeah. Killing the Host.
You can check out Michael Hudson's stuff on YouTube.
J is for Junk Economics.
He's in his 80s now, but he's got, timely videos going up all the time. But yeah, I didn't know where it was going to go either. I had, 100 different slides prepared. We about myths and things, but I just wanted it to be open-ended and we go where we go. And I think these are things that we should all be talking about right now, because we all realize, hey, something's going on. What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Let's get around the coffee table and talk about it, or the table of wisdom, table of knowledge. And I really appreciate the chance to kick around these ideas with you gentlemen.
Absolutely.
Oh, and next time we'll get you on and we'll talk about myths.
Wide audience.
Yes,
right
yes. We try to reach a broad crowd and a very eclectic group of minded individuals. We get all kinds of topics thrown at us or things to talk about, and we're like, I've not even heard of that one. So I think we keep each other off balance all the time, right? Which is a good thing, because if I just get stuck in my own endeavors and my own field of view, then I don't get exposed to other things that I should have an interest in and I do have an interest in. So it's good sometimes how, again, we kind of all balance each other out with that as far as perspective. But yeah, we definitely try to push it out to a big audience.
Great conversation today. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Mikey.
Great stuff. Thank you again, David. Have a good one, brother. That was awesome. Well, there you go.
You know what I was thinking?
We haven't had a good kind of financial in the weeds.
But here's the thing. It's really important.
It's so important, especially right now, because again, like he talked about,
the game
there's so many
monopoly.
people focused on woke or the opposite of woke, and conservatism versus liberalism versus
beyond that.
It's like, whoa. And this is the thing I talk to people about when they're like, capitalism is evil. It's like, guys, you got to look into the bankers in the history of banking. To me, that was always the tip of the spear with everything that was wrong.
Otherwise, it's just a Spider-Man meme where all the Spider-Men are pointing at each other.
Like your boy Amon talks about, the classicist Greek that
primary sources,
primary sources.
Primary sources.
That's the primary source of a lot of things that are
I was
wrong.
going to say, I think it's interesting that we're fascinated on the conversation of banking and monetary and this and that, even with all the UAP drones going on right now.
That's all part of it, though.
I know, but I think that's really wild that, like, even though that kind of like magnificent arc of a zeitgeist is taken off,
connected, dude.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to
can't
go
get
that
into
far
it
with
right
it.
now.
Yeah, we
we'll
can't
go
do all
another
that.
hour.
No,
Anyways,
I was just trying to say,
let's
like,
put this baby
you would
to
think
bed.
that the aliens would overtake, money and how money works, but no.
That's the thing. That's what's going to happen.
It's still interesting.
That's what's going to have to come through to bust apart this whole system, because we're stuck right now, guys. And it would have to take something so incredible, like admitting that there's electrogravitic, free energy, 0-point energy technology that could completely change the face of the planet. We don't need money. We don't need all this debt and loans and this financial system.
What if it's like David said, though? Okay, hold on real quick. This is my only thought. Okay, ready? This is the theory. You got to follow me. Aliens are real. UFO disclosure is coming out.
Yeah.
And so what they're doing is they're prepping you by doing that, right?
For
like
the
they're
end of the banks?
they're just going to do what he did, said basically, is they're just going to be like, all debt's forgiven now.
That's what we talked about this behind the scenes.
They'll just be like, all debt's forgiven.
Bro.
We have the alien technology. Everybody can stop fighting. There's enough resources.
You don't have to go to work. And
You're all going to learn how to fly UFO now. You know what I mean? Like, because again, like, okay, if Eisenhower really did meet the aliens back in the day and there's this whole agreement, let's just, again, really quick, go with me here. Maybe they were like, hey, look, you guys are going to have to get to a point where you can take care of yourselves once we give you this technology.
Yeah.
So you got to build up all this infrastructure and this and that. And
part
then
of the deal, wasn't it?
they're going to, otherwise, I don't really see a transitory way that
That's the transitory way.
Yeah.
Bam, we put it all together. Ladies and gentlemen, Justin Ranley, everybody. There you go, Bub.
I'm going to go home and eat some meatloaf. That's what's
man.
That's what's in the fridge for me right now.
Well, hey, much love to Stoner helping
He's
us out
the loner.
tonight. He's the Stoner helping us get David coming,
rocks.
patching through all the way from Australia. Make
I
sure
know,
you hit
right?
that like, subscribe, notification
That was
bell.
slick.
Guys, the Apple, Spotify, all the people listening, gotta share it. Gotta share the episode.
Like, review.
We got to
do
get
something.
The
if you
audio
don't want
platforms.
to. Yeah.
We're super strong in YouTube. Everybody out there. I know we took a little break this year, but we got to get you guys back. We got to get you back in the fold.
Sure.
Come back. We got some awesome episodes. But if you know somebody is like, yeah, Strange Road, share it. If you like it, it's got to happen.
Put it out there.
We need it. We love you guys. Peace, love, and chicken curries. We're out.
Later, everybody. Seriously.